Hello friends, my name is Alexis and in 2024 I read a total of 184 books. I'm here today to tell you which ones you absolutely need to read and which ones aren't worth your time. This is going to be a top 10 ranking of my best and worst books I read in 2024. So in case you're new here, I feel like I have to put a tiny little disclaimer at the front. I won't go too far into it, but just know if one of your favorite books is on my worst books list, I do not mean this as a personal attack to you at all. I am so happy if you enjoyed a book that I didn't. That is so great for you, and I obviously went into these books wanting to like them and they just weren't for me. So I just wanted to be really clear that I celebrate everybody's different opinions on books, and that's all this video is. It's my opinion on my enjoyment of these books, in the hopes that this will find somebody who does have similar taste as me and I can recommend them a book or two. Oh, and one other thing I should mention, these are not all books that came out in 2024. These are just books that I read last year. Okay, now that that's out of the way, let's get right into our top 10 list. All right, we are starting off strong with a little bit of a controversial pick because I feel like my 10th worst book showed up on a lot of people's favorite lists. So yes, coming in at number 10, my worst book is going to be Bride by Ali Hazelwood. So this is actually the perfect background, and I did not do this on purpose, but you can see my romance books and you can see my Ali Hazelwood collection. So it's very clear that I have read from this author before, and I actually really enjoyed her STEMinist series. So I was so excited when I saw this one. Vampires, if you're not familiar with me, are my favorite magical creature of all time. I love me a vampire romance. It's probably from my suppressed Twilight obsession. So I thought for sure this was going to be a new favorite, and I could not have been more wrong. For me personally, this book was very boring, which is unfortunate because I actually read it on a plane ride where I had nothing else to read. So I was really excited for this one. I thought I would fly through it. I would be totally engrossed in it the entire trip. So I actually quickly gave up trying to read this on the plane ride, and I'm pretty sure I just took a nap instead because I preferred sleeping. This definitely isn't the worst book I've ever read, hence it being in the 10th spot, but it wasn't good, and I think I'm definitely going to stick to Ali Hazelwood's contemporary romances from now on. So if you didn't know, this one is a romance between a vampire and a werewolf, and they are both sort of the royalty of their respective groups. So it's an arranged marriage to try to bring peace between the werewolves and the vampires, but neither of our main characters want to be in this relationship. They find the other really disgusting, but you know, because it's a romance, they do end up falling for each other. But yeah, it just didn't, there was no chemistry for me. Even when they went from enemies into lovers, it happened very suddenly and it didn't feel believable. How are you going to go from hating each other to loving each other when you haven't even talked? You don't even know each other. But the one good thing to come out of this is I now know for sure that werewolf romances are not for me. And coming in at number 10 on my best of list, we have Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury. I know it might be a little surprising to hear from me, a book lover, that I just finally got around to reading this in 2024, but yeah, somehow I missed out on this one. I never read it in school, and I swear I have a physical copy, but I have looked everywhere and I cannot find it. So this is one I ended up getting the audiobook from my library, and I couldn't believe how fast I flew through it. I know it's not a very long one. I believe it's under 200 pages, but classics can be a little intimidating. I'm always nervous. I don't know if the language is going to be easy to read. I don't know if the story is still going to feel relevant to today, and that was not the case at all with this one. This book was so readable, so addictive, and truly had some of the most beautifully written lines that I have ever read in a book. This book really is one that has stood the test of time, and I believe everybody needs to read it. Like, if you take one recommendation from this video, please let it be this one. Even if you're not somebody who reads a lot of classics, if you are a book lover, this book was made for you. So this one takes place in a dystopian future where we are following our main character, who is a fireman, and his main responsibility is to burn books. Until one day he meets his new neighbor, a teenage girl, who really makes him question, why are we destroying these books? What is inside of them that scares people? This is just so relevant to today with all of the book bans going on, and the message of the story is just so important that we don't forget it. And the ending of this book was just so hopeful, and I did not go into this thinking it would make it on my favorite of the year list. Like, I had to. This book is gonna stick with me forever. Coming in at number 9 on my worst of list, we have How to Make a Horror Movie and Survive by Craig DeLuey. So this one, which I guess is sort of the case for Bride as well, is really a case of this is a disappointing book. This is an author I've read from before and I've really liked their past books, but this one did not do it for me. So this one takes place in the 80s and it follows a slasher director who sets out to film the most terrifying horror movie ever made. And to do this, he is going to use a cursed film camera that whoever this camera shoots, something terrible happens to them. They die the most horrific death possible. And his plan is to capture all of this on film to make a real horror movie. All of this sounds incredible, right? Like, don't you want to read this book? Because same, but this is not the book I got going into it. I really don't know what happened with this one. I think the majority of this book was actually written to be satire more than horror. I think the author was really trying to comment on the horror community and how directors are constantly pushing the envelope, trying to make the next new scariest thing ever. And I really tried to like this one, but the more I read, it just was so insufferable. Our main character, the director, was so annoying. I could not stand being in his head. He was just so critical of everybody else in the book. He was really like gatekeeping the horror community, which again, I think it was meant to be commentary on people who do that, but like it was not a good book. It was not enjoyable. It was kind of torture to read. I will say one positive thing about it. The kills were very creative and very well written. Craig DeLuey knows how to write. So I just ended up being disappointed in this one. The characters just didn't work for me and I ended up disliking all of them, which probably added to why I wasn't enjoying it because I didn't have anybody to root for to live in the end. I was okay with them all dying. I couldn't wait for this book to be over. Now, thankfully, switching gears to talk about a horror book I did love, Our Share of Night by Mariana Enriquez. And I mean, thank God, because could you imagine if I read this entire book and it wasn't on my favorites of the year list? This monster of a book is just one of the most beautifully written horror books I have ever experienced. This book follows a man and his son as they go on a road trip after their wife/mother has mysteriously passed away. But that's truly just the beginning of this book. This ends up sprawling so many years, and we basically follow these two men through their entire lives as they grow and try to escape the demonic cult that killed their mother. This book really just had everything that you can ask for in horror. It touched on big themes of grief, if you are a fan of that. My arm's getting tired, so I have to put this guy down. I'll pop a picture up because this cover's stunning. We have to look at her. It reminded me a lot of Monstrilio, which was a favorite horror I read in 2023. The scenes with the cult and the rituals that they perform, and once you realize why they want this man and his son as a part of their group so bad, like, it's terrifying. And just really a beautiful, tragic, horrific story. Moving on to number 8 on my worst of list, we are keeping the horror theme going with The Haunting of Velkwood by Gwendolyn Keist. This is one that I don't have too much to say about. These lower books on my worst of list, I don't have like a burning hatred for them the way I do some of the higher up. It's just, again, with this one, I was bored and disappointed. I wanted to love this one. I paid full price for this new release hardcover, and it's a small book, so I don't usually do that for shorter books. I don't know. I can just justify it more when it's a big book because it's going to take me longer to read it. But I was so convinced I was going to love this book. I went out and I bought it, and I've already sold it. That's why I don't have it to hold up. She is gone. I sold her on Pango Books because I couldn't look at her anymore. So this one is another one with a super cool premise that sounded so good, and then it wasn't executed well. In this one, we are following a grown woman who is sort of a little bit famous for this unsolved thing that happened when she was a teenager. One night in the neighborhood she grew up in, everybody dies, except for her and 2 of her friends. The neighborhood is now inhabited by ghosts, and there's this veil over it that only these 3 surviving teenage girls can enter and come out of. This book had me at the very first line of the synopsis. I needed to know more immediately. So we end up following our main character back to the neighborhood, and she has agreed to work with this crew who want to film a documentary about this unexplained event and maybe try to solve it. And this book is gay. I was convinced this was gonna be a new favorite of all time, and it let me down so hard. I was so bored. I was so confused with everything going on, and there really weren't any creepy parts with the ghosts. It really was just a slow, quiet horror, and it didn't work for me. But coming in at number 8 on my best of side, we have We Used to Live Here by Marcus Kleiwer. I was a little nervous going into this one because it was very hyped. I was seeing everybody read this and not a single person was giving it a bad review. And I am so happy to say they are all correct. This is one of the best books I've ever read. This one follows a young couple who have just bought and moved into an old house. They're sort of fixer-uppers. They buy old houses, they fix them, and then they sell them. And that's what they're doing here. So our main character is home alone one night. She's just working on the house, and there's a knock at the door. And she opens the door to this family. I believe it's a man, his wife, and his 3 kids. And the man tells her, "This was my childhood home. I used to live here. Can I come in and just give the kids a tour of where I grew up?" And she's a little apprehensive, but the family's super friendly and super persistent that they came all this way, just give them 5 minutes. Big mistake. It goes from there. It is so creepy. It is exactly the kind of story that just gets under your skin because it starts out so innocently, and this is really a situation that could happen to anybody because you think you're being a good person by letting this family in, and just you cannot imagine the nightmare that this turns into, and just like, this is really like the perfect mix between a horror and a thriller book, and I am not somebody who rereads thrillers, but I think about rereading this one all the time because I just know there's something to this puzzle that I missed. I actually have a vlog where I read this one and I cried at the ending. I was so scared. So that tells you all you need to know. If you still haven't read this one, like, I'm serious, give it a chance. I don't think you'll be disappointed. All right, on to number 7. And I did not realize how much horror I had on this list. It makes sense, it's one of my most read genres, but unfortunately for me, this is a book I could not stand. The rage that I was talking about, it starts with this book. And that, of course, is going to be Incidents Around the House by Josh Malerman. I feel like this is another controversial one because I know a lot of people love this one, and I just couldn't see it. I hate this book. I am so angry at this book. I was like yelling at the characters for how stupid they were being. So Josh Malerman is another author that I've read from and loved before. And there were elements of this story that really worked for me. He's very good at writing horror. There was a scene in the bathroom in the middle of the night, and if you've read it, you know. Like, tell me you don't picture that every time you have to get up to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night. But besides the scenes with other mommy, it just, I couldn't get over my frustration with these characters. This one is told from the perspective of a 6-year-old girl who is being haunted by this thing she calls Other Mommy. And Other Mommy is a monster that lives in her closet and comes out in the middle of the night and asks this little girl, "Can I come into your heart?" Like, chills. What a terrifying premise. But as this book dragged on, and like truly dragged on, I just started to hate these characters so much. They were all so stupid. Her parents just fought nonstop. They made every wrong choice that you could possibly make. And the book just got very, very repetitive because of that. This ending absolutely filled me with rage. And like, even now, months after reading it, I'm so mad. I'm so mad I wasted my time on this book. Okay, that's enough of that. Moving on to number 7 on my best of list. This one was honestly hard to pick because 5, 6, and 7 really could be interchangeable. So just know these next 3 are tied because I love them with my entire heart so much. But the number 7 spot is officially going to Swift and Saddled by Lila Sage. I really can't stop screaming about how this book series single-handedly turned me into a cowboy romance girly. Like, what? Who? Me? It's still so hilarious to me, but Lila Sage knows how to write a romance and I can't deny it. So this one, of course, is the second book in the Rebel Blue Ranch series, which is a series of cowboy romances. And this one follows the middle sibling, Weston, as he hires an interior designer named Ada to help him renovate the guest house on the family ranch. And obviously they fall in love and just, I love all of the books in this series, so saying this is my favorite, like, it's a very, very close competition. But what makes this one stand out to me is Ada. It's the representation of her anxiety disorder that just, I feel seen when I read this. And I feel like parts of this book were written from me. I feel like Lila Sage somehow read my mind and used lines that I've thought or said about myself before. And just, it's perfect. And more than that, the romance is to die for. Like, again, I love all of the couples in this series, but if I had to pick, these 2 are soulmates. Okay, time to move on to spot number 6 on my worst of books. I'm gonna keep this short and sweet because I have talked way too much about this book and I cannot wait for this to be the last time. This spot is going to Den of Vipers by K.A. Knight. You might be surprised that this is so low on the list, but I read worse. This honestly wasn't as bad as I was expecting it to be. Like, yes, I still hated it. It was entertaining at least. So the beginning of this one actually had me. Once I got past the ridiculous plot, this is a dark, spicy romance about a woman who is sold by her father to this group of men called the Den of Vipers. And it is so ridiculous, over the top, trying to be edgy, that the sex scenes really just came off as comedic to me. So for most of the book, I was actually having an okay-ish time, as much as I could have hoped for with this one. Like, the writing wasn't good, but it was tolerable. Until I got to like the 60% mark, when I thought the book was over. We had this really big like resolution scene with everybody, just the things that were happening. It really felt like the end of a book. And then the story kept going. So I checked how much longer I had because I was listening to the audiobook, and somehow I still had 2.5 hours left of this book. I was ready to end it all there, stuck through it. And it dragged. It was so long. It was so repetitive. Why in the world does a book about a woman sleeping with an entire gang need to be over 600 pages long? But moving on to a book that was worth my time, on my best of list, we have Just for the Summer by Abby Jimenez. I'm so happy to have found this author. I think I read Part of Your World last year, and she just really has become like an auto-buy author for me. I just know when she has a new book coming out that I'm going to read it and I'm going to love it, and it's probably going to end up on my favorites list. This one was a super fun contemporary rom-com about a woman who is sort of cursed. So her thing is that every time she breaks up with a boyfriend, the next girl he dates, he ends up marrying. The men she dates, like, she's their good luck charm because they're gonna go on to find their soulmate. And she's really just accepted that this is a funny thing that happens to her, until one day she comes across a post online where this man is describing the same thing and how this same thing happens to him. So they end up messaging each other and sort of getting into a long distance relationship. They basically hatch this plan that they're going to sort of fake date to try to break each other's curses, because when they break up, they should both go on to find their soulmates. And no spoilers, but because it's a romance, I bet you can guess what happens. And it was so cute. I was literally crying tears of happiness at the ending of this. Like, I was giggling. I was literally having to pause the audiobook to like dance around my house and like kick my little feet and just, if you want to experience pure joy and happiness, you need this book. Moving on to spot number 5 on my worst of list. If you want a book that gives you the complete opposite feeling as that one and really leaves you feeling full of boredom and kind of questioning, why would I waste my time reading this? I have the perfect book for you. And that is The Only Survivors by Megan Miranda. I'm sorry to bash this book so hard. I feel like I'm being mean. This book didn't do anything wrong. It was just a waste of time, to be honest. This is supposed to be a mystery thriller, but not a single thrilling thing happened in this book. I'm gonna do my best to try to tell you what it was about, but like, it didn't have a plot. From what I remember, it is about a woman who, when she was younger, I think like high school age, her and a bunch of her classmates got into a big accident while on a school trip. And she, along with a very small group, were the only survivors. So every year, for I don't know what reason, this group of survivors gathers at this lake house and spends the week there. This was the slowest, most boring thriller I have ever read in my entire life, and the reveals at the end, what? One of them is something I had figured out at the beginning of the book and I thought was like common knowledge to all of the characters, but like, I guess not. And then the other one, so unbelievable. Just don't waste your time with this one. Usually with a thriller, I will get through them very, very fast, especially with an audiobook, because you gotta know what happens. You don't wanna put it down, right? This book took me 7 days to listen to. It was torture every time I had to put it on. Hello friends, editing Alexis popping in because I don't know what happened, but the first half of this clip where I introduced number 5 on the best list just is gone. So that of course is going to be Funny Story by Emily Henry. No surprise here. Emily Henry ends up on my favorites list every single year. She's definitely a favorite romance author of mine, and I really love how her books are more than just romance. They almost read a little bit like literary fiction. They just always deal with the main character going through some sort of pivotal time in their life. In this one, our main character thinks she has her life together. She's about to marry who she thinks to be the love of her life, until one night he comes home and confesses that he is actually in love with his best friend. So they quickly break off the wedding, and he is keeping the house, which means she needs a place to stay. So she ends up turning to her ex-fiance's, now girlfriend's ex-boyfriend and moves in with them, and then they were roommates. So this one was super, super cute. It had a little bit of a fake dating aspect because they were trying to make their exes jealous. And yes, I love it. I love all of Emily Henry's writing. I've seen this one compared a lot to the TV show New Girl, and while there are some similarities between Miles and Nick Miller, I wouldn't go into this expecting the same kind of story, but just going off of myself and the fact that I love New Girl and Nick Miller as a character, I think if you like that show, you will also like this. Okay, we are throwing it way back to a book that I read in January of 2024. This is going to be Knock Knock Open Wide by Neil Sharpston. Another book that I unfortunately bought brand new and have already sold. So this is another book that absolutely sold me with the synopsis. This had so much potential, and even when I started reading it, the first chapter was incredible. And then I don't know what happened. It was so weird. This almost turned into more of a contemporary romance, and then at the very end, it's like the author remembered that it was supposed to be horror and tried to link it back to the first chapter, and it didn't make any sense. It was so dumb, and this book ended up feeling like a major waste of time. But it's really a mix of Celtic mythology and a cursed children's show that nobody remembers. Everyone in Ireland watched this show in their youth, but we soon discover that no one remembers it quite the same way. And only our main character Aisling seems to remember that there was a small black goat puppet who lived in a box and only came out if you didn't behave. Like a super creepy, intriguing premise, but I think I'm coming to find that I just don't like books about cursed children's shows. I read a few at this point and they just always seem to disappoint me. Okay, we are getting to the point in the best of list where I'm going to start going feral over these books because I love them so much, I can't even contain it. But next up, coming in at number 4, I'm cheating a little bit because I am naming this entire series. That, of course, is going to be the Once Upon a Broken Heart series by Stephanie Garber. I don't know what it is about this series that had me in such a chokehold this year because it seems very been there, done that. It's your basic YA fantasy romance that we've all read before, but this man, Jax, the Prince of Hearts, I can't help myself. And yeah, I don't know. I don't read a lot of YA anymore, but sometimes a YA fantasy just hits so good. And that's exactly what happened with this series. If I had to pick, I think the second one was my favorite, but the series starts out about a girl named Evangeline Fox, and she is in love with a man who is marrying her sister. So desperate to do anything to stop the wedding, she makes a deal with Jax, the Prince of Hearts. So you're gonna get your wish, but not in the way you hope. And the story just takes off from there. It was so much fun. And I think a big part of it is, it was just so easy to understand and so quick to read. I love an adult fantasy book. I love how complex they get, but sometimes it's just too much for my brain. I just want a fun little fantasy romance adventure where everybody's happy in the end. Okay, back over to the worst of lists. I am sort of glad I'm filming it this way because I do really hate talking about these books, but then as a little treat, I get to talk about my best books, but we are almost there. We have made it to our top 3, and coming in at number 3 is Immortal Pleasures by V. Castro. I don't want to talk about this book anymore. This is another one that I remember vlogging for, and I went into it with so much hope. It started out good, and then just, like a lot of these, it just lost me. And by the end, I was like, what the fuck did I just read? This is a wild one. So in the beginning of this one, we are following an ancient vampire named Molly Nally, and she is actually based on a real life historical figure that encountered the Spanish conquistador Cortez way back when. So V. Castro takes this figure who is really seen as a traitor to her people and gives her a new history, like what would have happened if she had been turned into a vampire. And it starts out and we're following Molly in modern times where she collects artifacts from museums and returns them to the rightful owners, the cultures that they were taken from. And we learn that all she really wants in life is somebody to love. She's very lonely. So far, so good. I'm in it. I'm very interested. We get our first spicy scene. It's weird. There were some very weird word choices involving bees. Whatever, I was still into it until it took a turn. First of all, there was no plot at all. It was all vibes until this turned into smutty Bible fanfiction. Yeah. There is a figure from the Bible that makes an appearance as a character and becomes Molly's new love interest. And I am so confused by what I read. I don't know why this wasn't just a romance, because that's all it was until probably the 90% mark, and then the last 10% of the book, the author remembered that there was supposed to be a plot and just tried to introduce this conflict and then wrap it all up super fast, and it was so bad. It did not work at all. I think Immortal Pleasures is one you should skip, and instead you should go read Goddess of Filth by her, because that one was much better. And coming in at number 3 on my best of list, Tress of the Emerald Sea by Brandon Sanderson. This one was in my number 1 spot for a while. I read it early in 2024 and it stayed up there a long time. I mean, it stayed at number 3, so there are only 2 books that I read that I thought were better than it. And if you've read this one, I know you understand why. This is just such a delightful little book. I'm not the absolute biggest fan of cozy fantasies. I feel like I just need a little bit still at stake to kind of keep my attention, and I feel like this book did this perfectly. It had all of the cozy elements that I wanted, but this plot just full of adventure, and I love it. I love it so much. I'm a huge character-driven reader, which you will see in this book and the next 2. That's the reason these are the top of my list. These characters, I love them so much. These characters are all just so well written. They feel so real, like I know them. I tried reading a Brandon Sanderson before this one and I wasn't a fan of it, so I really thought his writing just wasn't for me. And I know it is different than his other stories, but this has really made me want to give him another try and to read more. And unfortunately, going back over to the worst of list, number 2, we are almost there. I almost never have to talk about these books again. I feel like if you've watched any of my recent videos, you might know what's coming. That, of course, is going to be Haunting Adeline by H.D. Carlton. You knew she was going to be on this list. What is there to say about this book that I haven't already said in a previous video? I think I've kind of made it very clear my hatred of this book. It was the most atrocious writing I have ever read in my life. Let me try to stick to my notes because I don't want to end up ranting about this one for 20 minutes. Like, she's had enough of my time. Yeah, writing, terrible. Like the fact that this is supposed to be a super dark, taboo romance about a girl and her stalker. Tell me why the sex scenes were the most boring vanilla sex I've ever read about. Like, okay, yeah, there was the gun scene, but besides that, what was exciting and spicy about those scenes? Absolutely nothing. In the beginning, it wanted to be a thriller. It introduced this mystery with her grandmother, and then it forgot about it for the entire book until like the 90% mark, where it tried to bring it back. It could have just a romance book. Not everything needs to be a thriller too. So yeah, those are my thoughts on Haunting Adeline, and I think it's pretty obvious I will never be picking up anything by this author ever again. But moving over to my best of list, number 2, Faebound by Sarah L. Arifi. I love this book. I love this book so much. I cannot wait for the sequel. This book is such an anomaly for me because I hate fairies. I have never read another book besides this one where there have been fairies and I've enjoyed it. This book is magic. I don't know how she did it, but I love this book, I love this world, and most of all, I love our main characters. This one follows 2 sisters. One is named Yirin and the other, what is her sister's name? Lettel. So Yirin and Lettel, they are elves until Yirin is exiled for a mistake she makes, and she has really bad luck because in her exile she ends up making a worse mistake and she actually kills a fairy. So Yirin, Lettel, and their friend Rayanne, who has also come with them, are all captured by the fairies to face punishment for what Yirin has done. Except it soon becomes clear that Yirin is the chosen one of this story, and just the drama and everything that happens. This book, I was screaming, crying, throwing up at it. I mean, look at all of my tabs. And I didn't even mention, there are 2 romances in this. One is a queer enemies to lovers, and the other is hate to love with like the sassiest female main character I have ever read about, and like, I just ate it up. I could not get enough of this. And I can't. I'm gonna go absolutely feral when the second one comes out, and nobody talk to me because I need to be back in this world with these sisters. Did it. We are finally to the number 1 spot. So starting out on the worst of side, my worst book of 2024 was No One Rides for Free by Judith Sonnet. If you don't know what this book is about, I don't even want to tell you. I wish I could go back to a time where I didn't know what this book was about. So this one is an extreme horror book, so I'm not gonna go into too many details because honestly, it was so disgusting, I don't want to repeat it to you. But this one starts out and it's very short. Thank God, because I could not have taken anything longer. I don't even know how I finished this one. And we are following a woman and her 2 college-age children, and they are on a road trip. They stop at a gas station. She runs in to get something, comes back out, and there's a man in the car holding a gun to her daughter's head, and he tells her to drive. So he ends up directing her into the desert, and just the most disgusting, terrible things that you can imagine happening to this family. That's what this book is about. I'm still new to the extreme horror genre, and I'm still trying to find my place and what I like to read. And this book is an example of exactly what I don't like. It was disgusting just to be shocking. Maybe this is just me, but I feel like extreme horror needs to have a message. Like, I'm not reading it just to be grossed out. And maybe that's my problem. Maybe there are people that's why they read extreme horror. There was no deeper message to it. There was no real plot. It was literally just reading terrible things happening to these people for no reason. I do not recommend this book at all. And if you're not gonna listen to my warning, please look up content warnings before you read this one, because I don't think this is a book that's worth your time, and I really think you should skip it. And for the last time, moving on to better things, saving the best for last, my number one favorite books of 2024 have to be The Raven Cycle by Maggie Stiefvater. Again, I feel like if you've watched my content recently, this is no surprise to you. These books just absolutely came out of nowhere this year and destroyed me. I am still so deep in my Raven Boys obsession, and I read this first one back in September. Like, these books are my entire personality. I think about them every single day. I think about these characters every single day. They feel so real to me, and I have not loved characters like this since I read the Six of Crows duology, which just another super hyperfixation series for me. I don't know what it is about YA fantasy. I swear I don't read a lot of it, but when I do, it just hits. I'm gonna hold up just the first one because they're a little heavy, but if I had to pick a favorite, it would either be number 1 or number 3, but just as a whole, I'm putting the series in my number 1 spot because it really is the characters that make it a favorite of mine, not the plot of each individual book. I actually read the first one back in 2018 and I hated it. I rated this 2 stars. I was not a fan at all, and I swore off the series. I said I wasn't going to continue it until this year when I joined Books and Lala's channel membership, and she was doing a read-along for the series. I decided I would give it another try, and I am so glad that I did. Like, I don't even know who I would be if I hadn't read these books this year. This series follows a teenage girl named Blue Sargent who lives in a house of psychic mediums, but she herself does not have these abilities. Until one night, she is helping with the yearly ritual where the psychics basically predict who is going to die in the next year as a way to kind of give them and their families warnings, make sure their affairs are all in order, that kind of stuff. When Blue, for the first time ever, has a psychic vision of this boy who is supposed to die this year. And we quickly find out and meet him as one of the Raven Boys. This is a group of these 4 super rich, well, 3 of them are super rich, but they go to this super elite private school, and for her entire life, Blue has thought of them as these really like pretentious, not worth her time people, until she really gets entangled with this group of boys. And of course, we soon realize that the boy she saw is the leader of the Raven Boys, Richard Gansey. And Gansey's one purpose in life, his driving force, is to find this ancient Welsh king who will grant you a wish if you wake him up from his centuries-long sleep. And this might sound like it's all over the place plot-wise, but like, it just all meshes so well. This series is just so whimsical and so full of magic and friendship, and I love it. It's everything I've ever wanted in a book. And of course, if you're anything like me and you are a character-driven reader, you have to read these books for the characters. I love them so much. This is the most incredible depiction of friendship I have ever read. This is truly one of those books where platonically, these 5 people love each other so much. And it is shown on every single page, just the little things that they do for each other without being asked, the way they know each other like nobody else, the way they think about each other constantly. I love the love these characters have for each other. And I wouldn't be able to talk about this series without a guest appearance, so one moment please, let me get her. Yes, this is a cat that first appeared in a vlog months ago. She was a stray that I promised I would not be keeping. We were looking for a home for her, but we obviously quickly fell in love as she is still here months later. But I want to formally introduce you to Miss Blue Sargent. Yes, I love this series so much that I named my cat after it. I woke her up from a nap, so she's kind of grumpy now. What do you think? You say hi? Okay, you can go. So I think that should be proof enough of how incredible this book series is and how lovable these characters are that I named a whole cat after it. That is going to be it, friends. Thank you so much for sticking around. I know this was a long one. If you would like to, you can leave me an emoji in the comments below. In honor of the Raven boys, of course, we're gonna go with the little blackbird emoji because that's the closest thing we have to a raven. And please let me know, what was your favorite book of 2024? Did any of my favorites also make your list? Or were any of my worst of books on your favorites list? So as always, friends, I hope you read a good book today, and I will see you soon in my next one. Bye.